Welcome everyone to Creative Work at a Distance. This is a panel discussion among some of the folks that you see on your screen right now. But before we get to that, we want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we are Think Company. We are an experienced design and technology consulting firm out of Philadelphia. I'm sure a lot of you already know us because you found us through various means that we promoted this webinar. But we are an organization about 13 years old. And we've been working in the world of experience design and technology and service design and user research and various other services in that area. This is part of a series of webinars that we've been putting on since the beginning of all of the quarantine and isolation around COVID-19. Our speakers usually are at various events, local and national. Because they haven't been able to attend those events, we started taking some of those talks and putting them online. This is the first talk I think that's very specifically related to quarantine and all of us working at a distance, so we're really excited about that. A couple of the upcoming webinars that we're going to be having, the first one, which I believe is waitlisted right now, but if you're interested in going into this panel, you can still be waitlisted by Philly Kai. You can check out some of our social media channels to find out how to register for this, but it's a panel discussion. It's part of a series of panel discussions that we do every year that just help people in career development in the world of UX. Philly Kai is a local Philadelphia professional organization, and we have hiring managers from organizations large and small, also in-house and an agency type of situation. So we have people from Vanguard, Elsevier. We have Dan Mall, who runs a consortium of freelance and contractors in experience design. Our own Abby DePrimo from Think Company are all going to be talking about career development and skill development within UX for UX practitioners. That's going to be next week, April 29th, from 6:30 to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, you can go to Philly Kai or to Think Company and find some links to how to register for that or get on their wait list. Next week, I'm very excited about another talk that we have. Neha Agarwal and Daraj Sapkal, two designers from Think Company, have been doing some research into how Dabawala's work out in India. It's very interesting. It's sort of a very manual service design situation out there. If you're not familiar with who Dabawalas are or what they do, this will be a fascinating talk that they're going to do from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern on April 30th. And then finally, we have our own principal of content strategy, David Dillon Thomas, is going to be speaking about design for cognitive bias, which is a podcast series that he did for a while. He's going to be talking about using mental shortcuts for good instead of evil, and that will be on May 14th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. So to get into the webinar that you're attending right now, just so you all understand, you're all muted by default. We're going to try to get the live Q&A to start sometime around 3:45 Eastern. If you're not on the East Coast of the United States, that's the time zone that we're going to be working in. So in about 45 minutes, we'll get to the live Q&A. We have everyone has their time reserved to go as long as 4:30 if anyone wants to stay after 4 o'clock. If you have questions while our speakers are speaking, then you can post them in the Q&A feature and other folks can upvote those. If your question is for a specific panelist, then make sure you include their name in there so that we know who we're asking the question to. I will be monitoring the Q&A channel, and I will choose questions based on upvoting and other attributes of those questions for the session at the end. I may select your question. If I do, then I'm going to try to unmute you. So if you want to ask the question, make sure you've got your microphone at hand so that you can ask the panel yourself and engage in a conversation with them. If you don't want to have your question be unmuted, or you don't want your name to be identified for some reason, you can always post your question anonymously, and I will ask it for you. We may not be able to get to all questions depending on the time. And we do have moderators in chat and Q&A, so if you have any questions over there, tech support questions, feel free to post them and we will ask them, or we will try to answer them. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce in Creative Work at a Distance, our team panel, our panel of team leads and practitioners are going to discuss how they've been making space for meaningful creation without sharing physical space. They're going to discuss the challenges that they're facing working in this distributed environment and how our teams have been working to overcome them. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, if I can get out a screen share. Here we go. I'm going to introduce our moderator, if we can get out a screen share, and that is Dan Singer. Welcome, Dan.
Great, thanks, Phil. Appreciate that. Great, so thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to the panel for joining us as well. We were originally trying to figure out what's the best way to talk about this topic of sort of creative collaboration during our sort of remote situation right now, and the idea of a panel came up, and I thought that would be really great because none of us are sitting there having figured this all out yet. Obviously, we're all trying to work on doing our best right now. However many days Phil said we're in this situation. But that being said, Think Company has been working remote across different offices and across client sites for years now. And so our design leads, our tech leads, our developers and designers have been figuring out ways to work on this. And so I thought a panel would be a really great way to talk about what we've had has been challenging to us, especially now, and how we're kind of experimenting and working on that. So like Phil said, I'm Dan Singer. I am a senior experience designer at Think Company. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves. And as an introduction, I wanted them to start with sort of recognizing the situation that we're in right now, and sort of sharing what has been really challenging for them about this situation. And how have they been like keeping healthy and keeping inspired in doing their creative work. So first, if I could pass it over to Allison.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Drechsler, and I'm a design lead at Think Company. And I think for me, the most challenging thing is not being able to attend social gatherings. I personally find those to be a really key part of my creativity and my process. So I've found recently that I don't have as much to talk about and converse with people because my life is, very much the same every day. And then, sorry, Dan, what was your second question?
Yeah, how have you been keeping healthy, and how have you been kind of keeping inspired to like do our work that sort of demands a lot of you sometimes?
Yeah, so my answer to this question actually isn't too different prior to quarantine life, but just trying to stay productive, really, even if it's just unloading the dishwasher or doing something kind of monotonous, usually keeps me primed for moments when I do need to be creative.
That's good. I have not been unloading my dishwasher, so that's great. Danielle.
Yes, hi, I'm Danielle Tratiz. I'm a senior design lead at Think Company. I'm a huge fan of in-person collaboration, so it's been particularly challenging for me to navigate the awkwardness of these Zoom meetings. So testing that discomfort today with you all. I mean, the challenge and the way I've been trying to stay healthy are sort of one and the same, because I'm on these Zoom conferences all day, so I'm talking to people all day, so this has become my social interaction, but also creating the space to like walk away and do other things has been totally necessary because my screen time has just been the majority of my day. So taking a second to go outside or like just sit down on the couch for a second without looking at a screen has been really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I was thinking about is that like, even though we were on our computers most of the day in the office, it did feel very different than this sort of like on the computer all day right now situation that we have. Great. And Ryan, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Ryan Killeen. I'm a senior software developer at Think Company. The thing I've been missing the most, it kind of follows this theme, right? Of I sort of miss my commute home. I live within city distances, so being able to walk to or home from the office was a huge decompression time for me, and so making sure that I still mimic that. The other day, I ended up like walking the same route. That it just keeps the brain on that decompression path. Goes a long way. And of course, I miss lunch with my coworkers, running into people, random conversations. Those are the sort of things that are really hard to replicate.
Yeah, I absolutely feel that those kind of like bookends of your day that sort of set those boundaries are definitely like less clear now. Great, and I thought this was a good place to start to acknowledge our own challenges, because we're like all leading teams, and those teams are made up of individuals who all are having these same challenges too. And Danielle, speaking as your experience as a design lead, like how have you been supporting your teammates and colleagues? Like how have you found that right balance of how to support them?
Yeah, so because I've been such a fan of in-person collaboration, the teams that I have been working with before this whole quarantine situation just really got used to working together very impromptu all day. So it was much easier to translate that to a digital scenario, just as long as we got over the fact that, hey, it looks like you have a lot of meetings on your calendar, but that's really just time we're working together digitally. So I found that continuing to work together on stuff this way has been really good. It keeps us talking to each other. It keeps us like not getting stuck in our own heads trying to solve a problem by ourselves. But also it doesn't mean that I have to force those social interactions with the team. It just very much comes naturally. Although it is good to still create the space to like either open up those conversations with some like casual chit chat, or set up separate time to talk just over coffee, or maybe virtual happy hour. So it's been a really easy translation for that one team in particular that I had been working with heavily before the quarantine. On the flip side, I had started coming onto a new project that had different working norms, where people tended to work individually, which is fine. But it did mean that there was a lot less time talking to each other. So the social interactions had to be scheduled a little bit more intentionally than some of the ad hoc stuff that was happening on the other team. So as I've come onto the project, I've tried to change the way that we're working a little bit so that those interactions don't feel as forced, and so that that collaboration is happening more naturally. So scheduling like recurring working sessions and making sure that we're all talking in the same Slack channel so that everybody knows what everybody else is working on. And then, yeah, that's been helping so far.
Yeah. Do you feel like you notice a difference in sort of like what those teams, like sort of the paths that those teams were on as they entered into quarantine, in terms of like the kinds of things they were producing or the conversations they were having?
I think that there was less conversation happening on the team that I've recently onboarded onto, so they weren't always sure what other people were working on, and then that was exacerbated then by the fact that we were all working out of our homes. So I think there's more of a familiarity now with what everybody else is working on, so people are feeling more confident to provide feedback and ideas and things like that. And I mean, more brains on a problem is going to result in a better solution than one, I think. So I think it's been good for the project and for like our social well-being.
Yeah, for sure. Especially for those the extroverts who like need that sort of gas tank filled every once in a while.
I need it so much. It's extroverts, right?
And Ryan, you actually recently sort of spun up a program kind of riffing off that same theme. You spun off something at Think Company to sort of kind of make those connections. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned one of the things that I miss the most is running into people at the coffee machine, or just getting to impromptu go to lunch with someone and get to know people who aren't on your team or are in a different department completely, or different projects that you have no insight into, right? And really getting to pick their brain and just hear what they're up to. And so one of the cool tools, and I know we're not really going into tools today, but something that was really useful was a delicious tool called Donut. That lets you set up random coffee meetings with coworkers, so everyone can join one Slack channel, and it randomly assigns 2 or 3 or 4 people, however many you want to configure it to like at a later time schedule a Zoom call. So you still get that random element, right, of talking to people in the org or different departments that you might not otherwise have a chance to run into. And while it feels slightly forced in the beginning, the randomness still helps feel new and fresh. And as someone who is definitely an introvert, like I love and also fear those random interactions. Having them scheduled and know like, okay, I have to be on for this period of time, which will be cool to get to know someone else. That's gone a long way for me. We're only in our second week of it, and hopefully all the poll results will show that people like it. We'll see.
Nice. Yeah, we've been trying that similar thing sort of on the design team, like doing one-on-one sessions sort of throughout. I think monthly we think we do them. Unfortunately, Donuts does not actually like send you donuts for your one-on-one meeting, which is really disappointing.
It is the biggest downside. That's my criticism too.
Yeah, great. As long as you pass that on, I think that's great. So yeah, we've kind of been talking about things that we're missing, and especially from this like healthy team sort of spirit. Allison, is there anything that you feel like you've been missing, and sort of how have you been working on that?
Yeah, so I really just miss technicality, basically. Like I really miss Post-it notes. I have Post-it notes, but I actually miss having a whiteboard to use on and being able to draw on a whiteboard. I mean, to give you some context, my current setup is I literally have my laptop on an ironing board and I use the edge of my bed as a seat. So I just like kind of miss like, be it in an office and like having a reasonable setup and yeah, having access to a printer and things like that. But to kind of piggyback off of like what Danielle and Ryan were saying, it's just taken a little bit more of intentionality to kind of fill those voids. And, of course, like looking at the tools that we have and leveraging some of the social norms that were already in place prior to this situation have been really, really helpful.
Yeah, and like and this doesn't have to go to you alone. This could go to everyone. What are those sort of like social norms? What have you sort of like found that you have to rely on a little more now than you had before?
I mean, luckily, our culture has always been super conducive to just flexibility. And like, I know Danielle mentioned like, popping over at somebody's desk and asking a question. And I've seen that a lot being translated over the digital space, so just everyone already kind of having that comfort level of like, oh, I can just reach out to this person over Slack and just chat with them if I need to, or feeling like they have that level of autonomy to create what they need in order to push the work forward, despite some of the limitations that we're facing, all being online.
Yeah. How would you like, and knowing some of our audience too might not all have that experience, how would you recommend, like, from what you've seen so far, and this again can be to everyone, what do you see as ways that you can get people a little more comfortable with sort of like simulating that like drive-by culture, but doing it virtually?
Yeah, we've encountered some of this with our clients actually, because, obviously we have varying clients and some of them may be in working situations that are obviously very different from ours culturally. So something that's been really helpful is frankly just being super vulnerable about it and kind of pointing out and recognizing that, yeah, this is not ideal, and we're all in this together, obviously, and, I'm here for you. Please Slack me anytime. Like, let me know if you have something, bring it up. You're never over communicating. Like if you're over communicating, you're probably communicating the right amount. So just kind of being, again, very like intentional around what the situation requires and being open about and honest too about like any concerns or hopes that you want to address day to day.
Yeah, to Allison's point, I've noticed a lot of people being upfront about expectations in a way that's been super useful, right? So when you send those random Slack messages, sometimes they're prefaced now with like, don't feel like you have to get to this yet, or, this can wait till tomorrow, or people just being very understanding of other people's times and states of, and whether they're in meetings and obligations, that type of thing has gone a long way to like setting a good tone for folks.
Allison, you mentioned a little bit with clients as well. It has sort of leveled the playing field, right? Because it's not like all of the people at Think Company able to easily access each other and have these side conversations, and all the people at your client having their side conversations. It's everybody's separate, so everybody's reaching out to each other in the same way, regardless of whether they work together or not. Work in the same office or not. There's also it manifests itself on things like Zoom as well, right? Instead of me sitting in a room with a bunch of my teammates in one box in the gallery view, and then the client sitting in another room with all of them huddled around in another box, and maybe the one guy who's like calling in remotely from Michigan. It feels very like us versus them, or like the remote person versus the in the office person. So now that everybody's in their own little Brady Bunch square, it sort of makes it feel more casual, and it feels a little bit more, maybe not ad hoc because it's scheduled, but I think people find more of their voice in this situation who may not have otherwise been willing to speak up.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like I could feel that divide before. And I remember being on one of your meetings, Danielle, for a team you're leading, and seeing like, it did feel like the client sort of had like a more relaxed mood about it. Yeah. Which was kind of fun.
And they were mixed in with all of the thinkers, which was fun.
Yeah. I could say as the guy in the floating box on a lot of meetings, both internally at Think and with clients, it's really nice to feel that level playing field. As someone who's been remote 3 days on again, off again a week, it's been a huge shift to have everyone be in this virtual space with me, which is really nice.
It forces us all into like the same tools also. So if you have like a collaborative whiteboarding space, it's not like a screen share and somebody like walking through a thing and the people responding to it. Like everybody actually has to be in that, like in this case, maybe it's a mirror board. And I bet I feel like there's something more individually empowering about that, because it's not like the person leading the meeting and then everybody just sort of watching. You're all in there.
Yeah, so it sounds like there are some positives. I mean, not to the situation, but there are positives to sort of accepting a distributed workspace as like our creative medium. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think rolling off of Allison's point on that intentionality, I think that's super important, to really like set the stage for whatever is going to happen. And it does, like all of this we're talking about, Allison, you said it so well, is that vulnerability, like being willing to sort of like draw back the curtain a little bit. I mean, we've had to do it to like opening sort of a window into our offices and our pets and children. But also bringing people into our processes a little more, I think becomes more important in this space we're in. So Allison, I wanted to kind of like continue to follow this theme of collaborative work. So as we're talking about like actually working with the people on your teams, what are the ways in which you sort of are able to stay in sync with these groups as they're sort of like all moving about their private lives during the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we all know, and as you just mentioned, now that like pets and children and all these other factors are, maybe drawing our attention away at different points of the day, it's been really, really important to keep everyone in sync by having a few places, called out for areas of contribution. So, whether it's like a digital Kanban board or some kind of mapping space where you can say, all right, everyone just get in here whenever they have a chance and contribute or leave comments or, flag a few additional ideas to think about further whenever you have a moment, has been really helpful for making sure that we're on the same page with like what people are thinking and doing and how they're collaborating and what we all need to be working on next. So yeah, I would say that that's been like the biggest thing, in addition to, of course, just constant communication, like I said earlier, and that sort of unashamed mentality of just over communicating throughout the day.
Are there people on your teams who have struggled with that at all? This like, I mean, not with any names, but are there people who've like how have you helped people who might have a tougher time adjusting to that, like constant communication, that sort of thing, if you've run into that?
Sure. I mean, of course, everyone has a different approach. I would say the biggest thing is just being proactive, like especially, you know, both with being a fellow team member and then also being the one leading the team, just kind of keeping an eye out and having sort of like a spidey sense of sorts around like who seems more or less engaged. And I would say that that has been one of the most, you know, getting back to your earlier question about challenges, that's been especially challenging because, you know, unlike video conference calls where you can kind of like feel out how people are feeling during that meeting based on facial expressions, things like that. When you're not interacting with someone, but you know their presence is there, just like trying to sense of like, oh, is that presence engaged? Like, are they contributing, thinking? And the way that I've gone about handling it is mostly just reaching out to that person directly and not mentioning that at all, but just saying like, hey, just checking in. Like, do you want to like hop on a quick call and chat about XYZ? Anything you need from me? Like, how can I help? Sort of thing. And that's proven to be fairly successful. You know, obviously we're all getting the hang of this still, even though it's been a handful of weeks now. So it's understandable there would be a bit of a learning curve there.
For sure. Have either Ryan or Danielle, have you tackled that in similar or different ways? Sort of dealing with or helping team members who might be more like might need more sort of coaching in terms of communicating and like sort of staying in touch with everyone, staying in sync in general.
Yeah, I think one of the important parts of you know, remote collaboration in general is just expressing how you like to communicate, because everyone's different, right? And you know, not one is right or wrong necessarily. You know, the modes in which you communicate, the patterns in which you communicate. Just setting the expectations up front is the hard part, and I think a lot of teams never get to, right? I in particular don't mind being bugged on Slack, right? If you need a quick decision, you know, you can bug me there. I almost, you know, rarely check my email more than once or twice a day. So if you need me urgently, that might not be the way. And just setting those expectations up front. Other people are the complete inverse or prefer a Zoom call over chat. You know, it's, I think just really important to take that time to ask your teammates and say, hey, how do you like to chat about these types of things? And if you do that work up front, then you can avoid a lot of the challenges that can come from that. But you know, that being said, the hard part is like when that stops working, what do you do? And that takes us back to this kind of vulnerability and honesty that has been a underlying theme for everything today. Is you just have to grin and bear it and say, hey, listen, this isn't working. Can we find out a way to make it work? Which is the tough but honest, you know, approach. So.
Yeah, and to that point of just understanding how people want to communicate, I know there are a lot of people that I work with that like just don't want to have a certain type of conversation in a public project channel. Like they'd rather talk about it one-on-one first, and then it's like, okay, I think this is ready to like share out with the larger group. Versus there are other people who are the opposite. And I appreciate knowing. Obviously, it's either asking or just figuring it out over time, just how people want to communicate. But I do try to make sure if they are more of the one-on-one type, that whatever we've talked about does eventually get shared out to the larger group so that everybody's working with the same information.
So it does seem like sort of as leaders, whether that's in title or, you know, in function on your teams, you do have to like sort of do a little bit of the heavy lifting of like making sure that others are like, you're sort of are trying to like coach your teams into communicating and over communicating and getting used to collaborating. Like you do seem to have to do a little bit extra right now than maybe you were doing before. Do you think that's fair?
I don't know if it's extra, it's just different. Maybe it's more intentional, right? Maybe that's the key word here. Instead of just taking it as it comes and being like, oh, like this would be useful to talk about further, or maybe we should bring this to the larger group in just like the regularly occurring time that you bump into each other. You're more conscious about deciding to do one or the other thing.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think things that would happen naturally when people have in-office access to people, that's the type of work like, hey, where do we document decisions?
Right.
How do we as a team make decisions? Those are things that intentionality makes a lot of sense. Danielle, I like that word.
Got it from Allison.
Yeah, I think, and as you all are saying that, that really strikes me as a situation in which like setting expectations around like communication styles and how you're going to move something forward was always important. Now it is just like extra important to sort of moving ahead. It's almost a requirement now. And I think that is like, it is a benefit maybe of leaders who are doing that intentional work right now that they can take with them, right? Hopefully when we're on the other side of this and we're able to like sort of co-locate, is still taking those things like communication preferences and stuff with them. I think seems like a really important takeaway. And one of the things, speaking of communication styles, one of the things that came up in sort of our brainstorming session for this was asynchronous communication. And this isn't something I don't think about it at all, really. I don't think about it actively. Ryan, this was something you brought up as like devs really do a lot of and are really used to. So could you talk about like what asynchronous communication looks like, in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for developers, we think about things as synchronous or asynchronous all the time for our code, right? Does something happen immediately? Am I waiting for that thing to happen before I do anything? Or can things happen in parallel? And so as far as team communications, something like a Zoom meeting where everyone has to be there is synchronous. And it's super useful for certain types of meetings where everyone has to be there to collaborate. And then there are, asynchronous ways of communicating, whether you're, leaving comments on someone's Google Doc, or you're leaving notes in an issue in whatever your issue tracker of choice is for your development cycle. You can say to the whole team, and they'll receive asynchronous notifications that, oh, Ryan's blocked, he can't do this because of that. And then you can move on to your next task without feeling blocked at all. And so making sure you're choosing the right mode of communication for the right kind of collaboration is super important. A lot of creative work is synchronous, right? Everyone in the room doing like a brainstorm or really, massaging an idea to get to the right solution. It's hard to do that asynchronously, but sometimes if you're chunking things out and you're breaking things down, asynchronous is a really useful way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really great divide, a really useful division to like, again, take that intentionality towards. And so I want to talk about the synchronous communication. And I think our audience might be really interested in like, let me say it this way, like I love whiteboarding. I think it really helps me put my ideas out there. And I find it's great for like building team spirit and really solving and like kind of cracking a problem together. Allison, I'll take it to you first. What has that sort of synchronous communication looked like for your teams? And like, do you feel like you're able to capture that same spirit?
So that is still a work in progress for the teams that I'm on, but I will say it's not looking too differently than what it would be in person. It's just, it's online now. So whether it's like all of us hopping on a call and then sharing one screen and then like annotating on that screen, but just kind of like using what we have to try to make it work and make it look as similar as possible to what it used to be has been kind of our best bet in the moment. But yeah, Danielle and Ryan, I know that the two of you are also sort of experimenting with some of those methods. So interested to hear what you've been up to.
Yeah, I was just talking with Neha about this, who's doing the Dabwala talk next week. And we shared, we commiserated about the fact that we were uncomfortable with an empty collaborative whiteboard online in like the opposite way that we're very comfortable standing in front of a physical blank whiteboard. So we found ourselves preparing ideas for our brainstorming sessions. I'm also a huge fan of sketching, and I don't physically have a whiteboard to do that with, and I don't have like a tablet or anything to do that kind of sketching. So I'm finding I'm sketching on like loose leaf paper, taking the picture and just like putting it on Slack or putting it in that collaborative working space Our teams typically like to use Miro. I said that before, but so it does support then like having that synchronous time together, working on something, saying, hey, here's where we've started. Let's talk about each of these things. And then the fact that it's not empty encourages people to contribute, but then also supports the asynchronous time because it's there. Nobody erased it. It's not a picture that we can't edit. So we can continue to build on that over time. And then those Sharpie sketches that I'm making on loose leaf, then I just continue to pile into that Miro board and load up with ideas, and I encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, as far as collaboration goes, that the prototyping with a designer, you know, sitting down and using code from a design system and saying like, hey, let's work through this together, like that is still invaluable and synchronous work, right? As a developer, seeing a sketch from a designer that they maybe, you know, outlined really fast and being able to plop some code together and say, is this it? And then have them see it in real life and go, no, that's not it. You know, that kind of iteration, that synchronous communication is just invaluable. So.
Absolutely. And Danielle, this is something we talked about before, and having worked with you on a couple projects, I know is something that like you are someone who really, I don't want to say pulls ideas out of people, but you, it's not aggressive, but you have a way of like sort of seeing when people have something to say and giving them the space and sort of like making them take the space. And that is like part of learning how to be a designer, is learning how to take up some of that space. So how have you seen, like, how have you worked in this time to sort of make sure people feel comfortable, like taking that space, brainstorming, collaborating?
Yeah, so in either like an ad hoc brainstorming session or any of this time that we have now regularly scheduled, feels weird to schedule it, but that's where we are now. Just regular time to get together and like talk about what everybody's working on in the project. Like I'm constantly scanning around at all the videos and looking for people who might have like tried to open their mouth and say something, or raised an eyebrow, or maybe like this sort of thing. And we'll let the other person who's talking finish, but then explicitly call on them and say, hey, it looks like you had something to say. We'd love to hear it. Or if there's somebody who is not necessarily actively contributing to the conversation and I've noticed like, I don't know, silence from them, I'm curious to know what they're thinking about. So I might apologize first to say, I don't mean to call you out, but I'm wondering if you have a thought, just to make sure that they're staying a part of the conversation, not feeling left out, but also if they're not comfortable contributing for whatever reason, giving them the out.
Yeah. It really makes me think back on this intentionality. I mean, even in like brainstorming or whiteboarding sessions that we're doing virtually, I've been thinking about like I'm one of my own challenges is that like I'm on a Zoom call with 16 people and I'm like drifting off and looking at something else, right? It's just like, it's really easy to sort of, I find it easier to disengage from what's happening. And so I think some of that intentionality to say like, Dan, I really want to hear from you in this sort of like chunk of time, and this is kind of what we're tackling, and sort of like setting them up so that they know that they can jump into that, I think feels like a really important mediation necessary for this like distributed collaboration situation.
Mm-hmm. I might do the same in person, but I feel like people are just naturally more likely to insert themselves that way in an ongoing conversation in an in-person setting. So I find that specifically saying, hey, Dan, what do you think, is helpful.
Yeah, and I think, and you kind of said this like quickly, but you said you're paying attention to people's videos and sort of like watching for what they're doing. And that's something that I think people are just naturally really used to doing when we're sharing the space. But when we're digital, there's a million things competing for your attention, whatever's on the screen share, plus your own, Slack or whatever, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is, everything coming at you. I don't think people are as tuned into body language as they are in person. And so I think that does become challenging.
Yeah, there's also the opposite problem where you have people who are like really eager to talk and then they're like accidentally talking over each other. which is awkward, but I think we're getting over it.
Yeah, we had, for the audience, we did have a working title of this, which is like, no, oh, you go. It's, no, you first, you, fine. That classic mix-up that we always have at the beginning of every meeting. Great, so we have a couple minutes before we get to Q&A, and I wanted to get to this theme, and I'll take it to you, Danielle, first, is what looks different now, like about sort of collaboration and creativity, and then I'll also sort of ask what looks the same to you.
Yeah, I like to come back to this theme of, well, I guess it's two themes, right? We've talked a lot about intentionality now, which was not something I was specifically thinking of in this way before. So being really intentional about the time that you have together. There's also this idea of awkwardness, right? So it's kind of awkward that you have to set up meetings for things that you would have otherwise done ad hoc, just for the nature of getting that Zoom or video link set up. So whether it's actually putting it on the calendar or just sending somebody over a link, there's still some level of formality about it as far as like internal working. However, it's like we said, it's kind of the opposite with the client, right? Like it's a little more informal when you're working with the client, because now you're all distributed in your separate little squares. You're inside people's homes, whether they have a virtual background or they're actually sharing their messy room behind them or not. Maybe sometimes Dan's is very clean. So I think
there's a reason for the screen, right? It's a messy bedroom back then.
Yeah, so there's this like this teetering between like extra formal and a little bit more informal, and it's a hump to get over for the people that you're used to working with more casually, but it's also kind of an added bonus for the people that you're used to working with in a more formal setting. And this idea of like leveling the playing fields between people who would normally work in different places, which looks different, but is cool.
Great. And Ryan, I'll take the same question to you, as like, what do you see as kind of looking different, and what do you see that looks the same?
Yeah, I agree obviously with a lot of what Danielle said. As far as different, I think for me the informality has led to a lot of really great collaboration with the client. There's less formal structures in the way of like sharing ideas or getting things done, which can be a double-edged sword, but everyone has a little better access to everyone else now, which can really smooth the wheels of like making decisions or just moving any blocker forward. So that's been a huge difference as far as like client collaboration goes. And then the same, what is the same? I think to some degree, at least for Think Company, we've been distributed. We've been doing distributed work for some time, right? For any company that has more than one office, or any individual who's remote, as soon as one person's remote, like everyone's remote from someone. And so we've already ironed out a lot of the painful parts of like, where do we keep documents of truth? Where do we make decisions? Where do we all socialize? Those types of organizational things that can be painful. When you're suddenly remote, is less painful if you've already kind of done that work. And I think we've been there. We've done some of that work. And then the other part that's the same is that empathy is extremely important. And everyone's using it more than ever, to understand everyone else's situations, whether they're similar or different. And it's still the most important part of collaborative work is meeting people where they are and where they need to be met.
Great. And Allison, same question to you. If you have anything to add, they took a lot of good answers.
Yeah, those are very good answers. I guess on this note of like meeting people where they are, I just kind of want to go back to like the things that have changed or that I've really noticed is like just expectation setting, at least for me. It's almost become like, it's polite and like expected, I guess. So like an example of this is now when we have meetings with clients, like we are very aware of the fact that they are maybe a little uncertain or unsure about like how these meetings are really going to go, because they had expected when they first like signed the contract that we would be in person, or, you know, there would be, you know, meetings that would happen and we'd all be in their space or they'd be in ours. So just being sure to send over that email ahead of time with the agenda like we always had, but also outlining things like, you know, if you don't mind turning your video on, or we're going to take breaks like this time and this time. And at that point, feel free to turn your video off and mute and, you know, go along your merry way until this time. So it's things like that, again, where it's like we're having to be a lot more scheduled and purposeful in the way that we're structuring our time, but it really avoids a lot of, I guess, anxiety around awkwardness and like, is this going to go well? So I would say that's something more recently that sticks out as something that's changed, even though, you know, Ryan and Danielle, to your points, like we have had the luxury, I guess, of having been set up pretty well for this type of work even before quarantine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be sure to get to some Q&A. I know we have some coming in, so I will leave it to Phil if he wants to raise some of those up.
Great. Well, I'm just gonna start by saying I was taking notes for myself during this. So this was great. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I suspect that we're going to go past 4 because there's quite a few questions in the Q&A channel. So just to remind everyone, there's some links that Suzanne will probably share in chat to everyone on the call, or everyone in the webinar sometime close to 4 o'clock if you have to leave at 4. If you want to follow up on those links. But I'm going to get to some questions here. The first one was asked actually very early by John Rodriguez, and hopefully if he's there. John, I've unmuted you, but if you want to ask your questions directly, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, I can take over. John? All right. Well, maybe I'll try asking his questions in case he's having trouble with his microphone there. So the first question he asked was, how has the current situation affected conducting usability studies? So it's like a really the sort of nuts and bolts practical question, but something that's probably very relevant. Has anyone on the panel actually done any kind of client interviews or usability studies since we've been locked up at home?
We're prepping some.
Yeah, I indirectly, I talked earlier about how I was joining a team that was already like in progress. I had joined the team as they were going through a round of validation, design validation. And I mean, they did find it easier to schedule people because people's schedules were more flexible because they were taking them from home and not necessarily from their place of work. So there was that. Otherwise, it didn't seem too different than the type of remote design validation that we would typically run. Was there a particular type of usability testing that you were curious about?
John, you're still unmuted, so if you fixed your mic problem, you could answer directly. Yep. I think we're having a hard time getting his audio to work. So I mean, I'll say this: I know that most of our usability studies that we do are actually virtual.
Yeah.
Right, so things haven't changed all that much. Do we have any tips and tricks that we can share with folks who are used to doing usability studies in a face-to-face situation?
Yeah, ironically, one of my projects conducted a series of remote usability testing before COVID-19. And for this particular project, we used, you know, an Envision prototype. And I would say that the biggest tip for this was that once you're in the session with the user, using the chat box to send over the link. I know that one of our current teams, as well as kind of working with our development team to do some usability testing with a dev build. So that's, you know, another avenue. If you're working with a client that maybe has a lot of firewalls and isn't able to access certain tools like Envision, that's something that we're having to plan for and really think about with this other client in order to complete the remote usability testing successfully.
Allison, do you remember the name of the mobile usability testing tool that we used? Because that was so cool.
It's called lookback.io. It's pretty good. I will say we unfortunately encountered some like connectivity issues, but with proper preparation, you can kind of avoid that. Like if you're able to run a speed test with your participant prior to the call or something like that. But yeah, so that's a really great remote usability testing tool to leverage during this time. And it is great for mobile as well as desktop usability testing.
The one other thing I'll add as comes to mind is like one of the best things about doing research with a co-researcher, a note taker with you, is that you're sort of able to like ride the mute button on your speakerphone and like have conversations about what you want to ask, while it's happening, and it can sort of evolve. So that sort of back channeling can be really effective for getting a good really shaping a discussion. And so I'm thinking about like, okay, we have a couple coming up, couple validations coming up next week. So I'm thinking about like, how can we kind of sort of keep that back channel going to be able to focus the session. So
I think that's really important. And that's kind of like for everyone on the webinar, just to know, we're paranoid about things falling apart during the webinar here. So we all have our cell phones sitting in front of us, like, in case we need to back channel each other, we've got Slack open and things like that. So that's a great tip too, to make sure that you have backups for your backups for back channeling and things. For that, great. I'm gonna jump to John's second question just because both of his questions were upvoted, and it's a similar question, but he's asking about any tips on conducting online brainstorming sessions with clients. So I think Allison, you were involved with like a marathon all day retro with a client the first day that we were on quarantine. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So just as an anecdote, we had planned to fly to a client site to conduct a workshop with them. And it was like day one of quarantine life, and we had to change plans and pivot, and it ended up being an 8-hour-long Zoom working session. So I would say that the biggest thing that we've been learning through other team experiences as well is, again, kind of, meeting the client where they are. So if you have a client that is maybe more uncomfortable with kind of this whole digital realm situation, it's totally worth scheduling like a 15 to 30 minute call prior to, maybe your brainstorming session, just to get them familiar with the tools or answer any like questions they might have, maybe address any kind of like fears anybody might have going into your collaboration session. This is especially helpful if it's like a group of 20 people or something, just like opening that up as an option, saying like, hey, like during this time, I'm available. We can, play around with some things and get your feet wet, make you feel good. And then another part is really just thinking about, kind of to Danielle's earlier point, like populating a few things ahead of time just to kind of serve as an example and make people see like, oh, okay, it feels a lot more comfortable knowing that my idea isn't the first one on this blank page. So those are a few things that we've found really helpful.
Sorry, I lost my mute button there. Anyone else? We've all sort of been involved with other kinds of creative meetings over the past few weeks. So does anybody have any other tips or tricks to keeping the creative juices flowing during those meetings?
Willingly being wrong has been a great technique, right? Like just putting something out there that like absolutely is wrong, that people will have to say like, no, not that, has been a great way to start conversations if you're having trouble making progress on something, right? I forget where I read about the suggestion, but it was about when you're with a group of people trying to figure out where to go to dinner, you can suggest fast food, and then everyone will have an opinion about where you should go. And so that technique has been pretty useful for pretty much any kind of creative endeavor, whether it's deciding the final product solution or figuring out a feature or something like that.
That's great. I remember that was a long time ago. I attended some workshop somewhere, and they suggested reverse brainstorming, which was everyone has to come up with the absolute worst idea, and then you discuss why that idea is so bad, and that actually gives you attributes to make a good thing. That's great. That's great advice. Let me go back through a couple of other questions in here. I'm going to actually, Nicholas Kraft has asked a question about how this may change the way we work in the future. So Nicholas, I've unmuted you. Let's see if we can get this to work.
Hello?
There you are.
Hi.
You are live.
It feels good. Caller number 10.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think Phil kind of summed it up. I'm just kind of wondering, it's kind of more of a speculative question. Do you feel like the kinds of adjustments that we've had to make to work will linger in some ways post-pandemic, or will there be any kind of lessons learned kind of during this time that we feel like will improve the way we work post-pandemic?
I'm hoping that that concept of leveling the playing field and like making these types of conversations more accessible to people who might have otherwise been intimidated or maybe not felt like it was the place in person, or if it was like one group of video people versus the other group of people, having that playing field been leveled for at least a month and then coming back to whatever the status quo was, I'm hoping that people will maintain that voice that they found and continue to contribute and want to speak up in that way. It also makes me think of, so Ryan, something that you had said earlier about just us being fortunately in a good enough place where we had the tools that we needed to work remotely because we've had been for some time. And then Dan, the project that you and I were on together, where if one person was remote, everybody was remote. So we all logged into Zoom just so that you could see each other in this way, as opposed to those huddled groups. So I kind of hope that the spirit of that lives on. Like maybe people will be more likely to log in on their personal laptop as opposed to just relying on the one in the conference room so that you can all see each other. I feel like that would be a great practice to keep going after the pandemic.
That's great. I see a lot of nodding heads. Anyone have any other thoughts about what life is going to be like post-pandemic, what we've learned, and how this can help us?
Yeah, I feel like there's a real pulling down of the geographic walls around a lot of things that aren't actually constrained by any kind of physical notion. With everyone feeling more empathy about working remotely and being capable and realizing that their company is capable of it, one of the things that comes with that is who you can work with, which is almost anyone, right? There are always going to be some time zone limitations, but you can figure out synchronous and asynchronous work together, and that really opens up the pool of who you can collaborate with, which is awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that for the people who are willing to put in the work now to like make really strong communication, make really strong ties with their teams, making sure people feel like they can participate but still have boundaries to their life, I think we're going to see that work like will pay off twofold on the other side of this, hopefully, because right, all those boundaries, all those preferences are all really important. All those learning styles are all really important. But I think someone made the point that you can sort of like gloss over them a little easier when you're co-located, right? It's sort of a crutch, right? I can sort of move past things because everyone sort of figures it out a little bit together. And I hope the work on that will pay off if people are willing to do that now.
Absolutely.
I'll make an observation here that I've noticed, and I think that Dan, you and Danielle were talking about this earlier, that now that we're all meeting remotely and we all have sort of a close-up camera on our faces while we meet, I feel like some of the folks who are quieter in group settings, they get more of a voice, and we tend to like gravitate towards paying more attention to them because we may be able to see their facial expressions or whatever, because everyone's sort of on an even playing field. I feel like I've been hearing more from folks that I don't hear from as much in group settings, and I really like that. I like that we're getting like a more diverse set of voices in a room where often the person who talks, the loudest person is the one who dominates the conversation. So that's something that I hope we can find a way to carry back in once we can all meet together again.
Thanks a lot.
Sure, thank you, Nicholas. Actually, you had one other question, so I'm going to leave you unmuted if you want to hit your second question too.
Sure. What was my second question? Oh, so we were well, I was listening to you talk earlier on about just how we've kind of taken the travel to the coffee machine or the commute to work for granted. And I kind of wanted to maybe explore that a little bit more. Like, I see those kinds of gestures as like actually really important to nurturing creativity, just like the kind of shift in context, right? Whether it's a spatial context or a cultural one. So I guess I'm just wondering, yeah, in a less abstract way, how have you kind of found alternatives to nurture your creativity when our mobility has been so constrained, and that can be like a real source of inspiration in some ways for our creative work?
Does anybody want to take that? There you go.
Yeah, I can chime in here. So this question really speaks to me because my husband and I love to travel, and that's been a real downer for us. And we totally have sourced inspiration from getting outside of our really small apartment, you know, in South Philly, and like seeing other things. And so we have sort of been channeling that now into like making our home life really special and exciting. So like cooking really elaborate meals that are way beyond our skill sets, but like, you know, having the opportunity to just taste something really fantastic, or, you know, even if it's just like walking to different parts of the neighborhood that we never ever went to, and trying to find like beauty within our more local spaces that are attainable and, you know, achievable in these constraints that we're facing. So, you know, that's just kind of anecdotal, but it's to the point even where my team and I have been laughing for the last couple of days, because I was on this client call earlier this week, and my husband was in the kitchen roasting like really spicy peppers, and I could like barely get words out because the air was like so spicy, and it was just like, it felt like I was being transported to some other country, because like who eats, like, well, at least we don't eat things that are that spicy, you know, both being like born here and kind of meat and potato people. But yeah, so a little bit anecdotal there, but that's how we've been kind of keeping our creativity and curiosity alive.
There was a girl who, I'm not working with her currently, but when I was, and this was early in the quarantine, she was maintaining her commute by like walking around the block before starting her workday, which I found hilarious, but also probably a great idea. I haven't picked up on that, and I don't know if she's still doing that, but I thought it was a creative solution to a problem that we're all having.
Wait, so she walked the distance of her commute, but kind of in circles or in laps?
I don't know if she walked the full distance, if
Yeah.
just do a lap around the block before starting her workday.
Right. I think it was like she would like get dressed, like do everything as normal, walk around the block, and she found it to be like a lizard brain sort of like activation. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was cool. But also, like, even when we were all in person, I always tried to find time to just do some mindless web searches for pretty things on the internet, or to learn something new that might help my design day to day. So I've been continuing to do that. It is more screen time, which I don't love, but it helps break up the day from like one Zoom call after the other, and then into my design file. And is just, you know, an island of inspiration.
Yeah,
Great.
like Danielle, I definitely feel like doing dishes or doing something small and menial is a great way to reset. It also helps to have all of those like social channels that we have in Slack, just for all types of things where people are sharing their music or their movies or books that they're reading, and chiming in on those conversations goes a long way to thinking about other things so that you can get back to doing the creative work.
Yeah, what was that shared DJ tool we were using?
Yeah, what was that called?
It was like a shared Spotify playlist. That was kind of fun.
Jukebox. Yeah, so we had a live sharing of someone's, you know, Spotify list, and anyone could jump in as DJ and share the music that they were jamming out to, and people could tune in. And that was a really cool shared experience.
Yeah, it was a nice
That's great.
grind.
I'm going to switch over to, we're after 4 o'clock, so this is the time where sometimes I give the mic over to people and they're not here anymore, but I'm going to see if Adam Johnson is still with us and if he wants to ask his question about creativity. Adam, you're on.
Yeah, hey, thank you for the mic. So I was wondering if your creativity is more or less active during these times, and if it's less, how do you keep creatively fresh?
Oh, what a great question. Who wants to take that one first?
I'm gonna honestly say that it's less for me. I think that it's like I have struggled with I think like with my focus, with like to Ryan's point, like my headspace, like getting into work. Like I really enjoy our think spaces. We have a beautiful new office last year that I think is really built for creative work. And it's really, and it's hard to be out of that space and like literally be in the same space every day. And so I've struggled with that a lot. I think one of the things that I'm working on is to acknowledge when I'm low and that's okay, right? Like, it's like, okay, right now it's not going to be a super productive time. It's not going to be a super creative time. I hope tomorrow is better. And I think there's like some level of just like accepting it and trying to like make that space, I'll try something different tomorrow. I'll go on a walk or something. But like trying to force something that's not there, I think is ultimately like will hurt you a little bit over time. So yeah, that's my 2 cents from a failure right now.
You're not a failure.
Thank you. A proud failure.
I find that doing the easy thing first when I'm not feeling creative just makes me feel like I've accomplished something. So like we're working on a site that's sort of like an e-commerce platform. I've been trying to ask the team to just do the search results page because it's so much easier. It's the same component over and over and over again than the homepage. Then you can like take what you've learned from just like finishing that thing back to the homepage. So yeah, taking the easy way out, hoping to find at least a mental break or inspiration from that.
Any other thoughts, Allison or Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, my main thought is, I totally agree with you, Danielle. And actually, I was kind of thinking the same thing, that it's like always go for that low hanging fruit, and then you'll get in the groove. But as far as like work creativity, I've just found that leveraging just personal hobbies in those times is really helpful. Like if it's a book that you're reading, that's just like a nice little mental break, like go read the book, or like, like you said, Dan, like taking a walk, or just kind of like noticing like little simple things that make you happy are really helpful in like getting back into the spirit of whatever you're doing at work. Because usually when you hit those walls, it's yeah, like you said, Dan, like it's best not to try to like plow through, just like pivot and shift a little bit and come back to it later.
I have a little thought that so I've had a couple of challenges that I'm trying to work through, and I just find myself completely uninspired by them. And 2 times in the past few weeks, I'll wake up at like 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. or something, and all of a sudden I'm like, I just can't get the creative juices are flowing then. And I actually forced myself to get up and go and start working on it then, because I couldn't get back to sleep. And I was like, I don't know what's up with my patterns of my brain, but I might as well take advantage of these opportunities now. And then find myself at about 5 o'clock, like walking away from my computer and taking a nap to recover from that early morning surge of work. But like for me personally, I don't know when the solutions are going to come to me, and if it comes in the middle of the night, I just kind of let it happen now, which never happened to me before. All right, let's see. A bunch of other questions are from Anonymous, so I'll ask them of the crowd. Let me clear out that one. How do you stay motivated and productive, especially if your project is experiencing delays that are out of your control? how do you keep your team motivated and productive? I think we've hit this a little bit, but I don't know if anybody has any other points about especially keeping others motivated and productive.
Yeah, this is something that one of my teams is currently facing. I would also be really interested to hear what the answers are from you all. I saw Ryan, not to call you out, but saw your mouth about to open.
Oh no, you're using Danielle's technique.
I know. That's what I learned.
Yeah, but
Sorry.
For me, it's a lot of like the kindness that Dan shows himself when he can't push through the thing is important to show the rest of your team and make sure that they feel and start to internalize that, right? Which is, in reality, we're in pretty extraordinary circumstances, and as a team to get through, you have to allow for that. And so saying, hey, this is okay, we're going to get through this together, and that you forgive yourself, that's maybe the best way forward that I can think of. It's a human solution. It's less of a practical tool that you can apply, but it certainly makes it a little easier to get through together.
Yes, another item that comes to mind, and it depends on obviously the nature of the project, but this time is just really like great for skill building, just general skill building. Like if there's anything that could be helpful for this project in the future, even though it's like on hold, that your team doesn't currently have under their tool belt, like let's use this time to be productive in that way and prepare and think through, like essentially like anticipate curveballs that could happen once you are up and moving. That's something that we've been sort of dabbling with on one of the teams that I'm on that's experiencing something similar.
Yeah, I was just going to say something similar. Is like even we have this situation happen from time to time. I remember, Danielle, we had it on the project several times that we were on, that I was on first with you here, where like then we would take like sort of that downtime, as it were, and go and explore like something totally different, something that like, yeah, this is probably a stretch. Yes, we'll probably never get here, but it does end up teaching us about the problems that we're currently tackling, and kind of like helps us think about like, oh, okay, well, when we do get back to this, we can sort of design it knowing that someday we might like to take it here. And I think that always felt like a fun, like sort of good use of time.
Yeah, and if it's not like, if it never sees the light of day on that project, then maybe it'll be something you can bring to the next project.
Just take it.
It's awesome to hear from designers like the same thing that developers do, right? We'll go pick up a new tool or a new framework and go build something that'll never see the light of day, and learn something new. And then it always opens another door somewhere else.
Great. I think we lost Phil, so Suzanne's coming in. Great.
Hey everyone. Yeah, we lost Phil. I guess something happened with his internet, so I'm going to jump in and just ask the few questions that we have left here. So the next one we have is from another anonymous attendee. Any tips for handling uncomfortable conversations on camera, specifically how it may impact creativity and productivity after the fact? I know we're all on camera having one-on-one conversations and group conversations every day, so this is definitely a real thing that lots of us are facing. So any thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that like not every call has to be a video call, right? And some people actually prefer really sensitive conversations or difficult conversations to be phone calls, as opposed to something where you might be too vulnerable, right? For something that is like of a sensitive nature. That's my only tidbit, but worth throwing out.
I think one thing for this is like similar to setting an agenda for a meeting where you're unsure of what's going to happen with the client. I think for yourself, to prepare yourself for that meeting, to write an agenda of like what you want to cover and the things you want to be able to say. If it's something that's like surprising to you, I think show yourself kindness is the theme that I'm always going to come back to. If you feel like you didn't get to say everything you wanted to say, or like you don't have a good response in that time, you can say, can we take this up another time or something? Like, I think it's okay to like express that vulnerability, and rather than again trying to like make a situation could end up being more uncomfortable if you're really like forcing it. So I think prepare as best as you can, and if you need more time to prepare, just be honest about that. Is my specific tip there.
Yeah, something else that comes to mind is, you know, in an in-person working setting where, you know, maybe there's an uncomfortable thing that happens or an uncomfortable conversation. Like usually there's always like the next day and the next day and the next day where that you have repeated continual contact, and whatever maybe like soreness there was sort of eventually goes away, you know, just naturally because you're interacting and you make new memories with that person and whatever. Or, you know, you just kind of realize like, yeah, you know, we have rough patches and no big deal, we're going to get over them. But kind of in the same vein, in this new virtual realm that we're in, trying to emulate that sort of continued contact would probably be helpful for the relationship. So whether it's like, you know, you have the conversation and it's uncomfortable, but just making sure to like touch base again, like giving time to kind of like cool off or whatever it may be. And then, you know, revisiting that conversation or person, just to sort of like keep the relationship going in an effort to not hinder productivity or creativity from that moment on.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? No.
Awkward conversations are awkward on video, in person, and on the phone.
That is true. Okay, so let's jump into the next question here. We have another anonymous question. This one's pretty interesting, and I'd be curious to hear what you all have to say about it. There's a certain degree of privilege that comes with being a knowledge worker where we can continue to work remotely and still think creatively during this time. How do we deal with the guilt of knowing that not all can enjoy this luxury and that others are kind of struggling in different ways from us right now? Great question.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I was kind of eyeing it as it came up, because I think that's something that I've certainly struggled with personally, and I think that there's like work that goes into dealing with this. I think the question asker is great to first acknowledge that like there is this privilege, and yes, and there's no way in which you can shed that privilege, right? That is a situation we're fortunate to be in, and there are people who don't have that. So I think that one, acknowledging that privilege, and then two, saying that I can't. It serves no one to pretend that I don't have that. And so I think you think about, well, how can this serve people, right? And so the people who can keep their jobs, who can continue to be successful in this time, I think you can ask yourselves how you can use that privilege to support those who don't have it. So, right, feeling like I can support the local businesses in my community because I still have a job and I know that they don't. And so feeling willing to like, whether it puts monetary resources or, you know, whether that's time supporting other people, doing grocery shopping for people. I think there's been, I'm sure everyone has seen the amazing acts of service and generosity that have happened over the past month. And I think that's the way, like the asker mentions guilt, like how do we deal with this guilt? And I think like that gets into this should space that I work a lot on myself, is like, I should be doing something different. And ultimately that is like, that's not going to help you as much as like productively trying to share what you have, is kind of my long-winded answer to that really good question.
We've been sending care packages to family. It's my husband's idea. He's a much better person than I am, and not that I wouldn't be doing that, but it wasn't natural for me to think of that. So it's been nice. We like sent some stuff to my grandma. We sent some stuff to my aunt, his family who lives in the UK, and they're staying inside too. So we've been talking to these people a lot more often and on this type of video chatting because that's become normalized, which is great. And hopefully that continues on after the fact, right? Because we've broken down those geographical barriers and there's nothing stopping us from doing this all the time. But yeah, we've been sending stuff too, just so that they know we're thinking of them.
I think both Dan and Danielle's answers are perfect, right? It's you know, all you can do is act. and try and support those who need the support the most at the moment, whether it's through mutual aid in your local neighborhood, or it's using your skills as a designer or developer or whatever type of creative work it is that you do, and donating time to support small businesses, helping them transition into like what is a completely different universe to them than what they're used to. So yeah, similar answer, right, is it's important to acknowledge, and it's important to take that action and move forward and help others.
And I'll just return to this theme that we've all mentioned, is like be kind to yourself, because it might not also seem like it, but sometimes you can struggle too. You could acknowledge it's not the same struggles as other people have, but you're still allowed to have a tough time with this, and allowed to have off days, and it's really great if you're in a supportive work environment where they acknowledge that, and let you sort of be real, because we're all just people trying to do our best right now.
Great answers, everyone. Thank you. It looks like that's everything that we have in our Q&A. So we're coming up on 4:30. We can probably leave it there. I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel. This was super interesting. As Phil said, I was kind of taking notes for myself as well. So hopefully everyone in the audience learned a thing or two here. So just a couple of housekeeping reminders. After this webinar wraps up, everybody will be getting a link to this recording, and you are more than free to share that out with whoever you would like. That'll come to your inbox tomorrow morning. We have a couple of links for feedback on this webinar. Please, if you have a moment, we'd love to get your feedback about how this went, any future topics you would like to see, anything like that. We're offering a virtual coffee opportunity with you and anyone on the panel, probably a small group of people from the panel. If there's anything that you'd like to chat more about, you can sign up through the link that we have here. And if you enjoyed this session, we have 2 webinars coming up. On the 30th is Mumbai's Dabawalas, Icons of Service Design, and then Design for Cognitive Bias on May 14th. So I'm dropping that into the chat again so that you have them, but you'll also get them in a follow-up email. So that is it for today. Again, thank you to everyone for coming out, and thanks to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.